And we will share screen. Okay. So good evening, everybody. Good to see you all. Just a couple of announcements before we get going. So one announcement is that Thursday night, this coming Thursday night, meaning the night after tomorrow, we are having a, God willing, if the weather holds up, if it doesn't rain, we're going to have a Lag BaOmer party, a Lag BaOmer festival party outside in our backyard with a bonfire and some l'chaims and some music and some divrei Torah. And it's just an opportunity for people to get together and see each other. And that is going to be Thursday nights. I think, did we say 7:30, Julie? Is that what time we said? I believe it's at 7:30. Yeah, okay, great. And
what can we bring?
You can bring yourselves, and if you want to bring a bottle of kosher wine or some 6-pack of beer or anything, you can do that. That's fine.
Okay.
There's no need, but we're happy to have everybody. It's exciting. And the other announcement is that next month, I haven't decided the exact date yet. There's a couple possible dates, but we will be having our annual May cause match fundraising crowd gathering campaign. So we'll be the money. I'm raising the money in advance to do matching, so that the money that's donated on the day of the event will be, every dollar will be matched by $2 other dollars. So $100 becomes $300 kind of thing. And there are many ways that we can help to make this successful. One way, obviously, is by donating. And donating is until it hurts a little bit, because we have a big addition to the budget, which is bringing in a new couple. So that's going to be a challenge that we need to be able to overcome. And in addition, really helping us to amplify the campaign. So amplify the campaign means when the campaign actually goes live, to post it on Facebook or wherever you post things. And if there are individual people that you can reach out to and say, hey, this is a cause that's very important to me, an organization that means a lot to me. If you could help out, every dollar, $36 becomes whatever it is. What's 36 times 108, whatever it is, right? So yeah, so that's the idea. And then hopefully by doing that, we can be successful, reach the goal, and meet the budgetary needs for the year. Okay, so we are going to begin unpacking Parshas Emor. And I'm going to do this a little bit differently than I have in previous weeks. I'm not going to spend very much time at all on the overview, because the part that I want to go into a little bit more in depth is going to take a fair amount of time. So just a quick overview of the Parsha very briefly, and that is that the Parsha starts off dealing with specific laws that relate to the Kohanim. The Kohanim were the descendants of Aaron. If you call, for lack of better translation, we call them the priests, but don't get confused with, fathers and confession. This is just a classification that if a person is a Kohen, they're a descendant of Aaron, they have certain responsibilities and obligations in the temple specifically, and to administer the daily service and the festival services in the temple regarding all the sacrifices. And since they play that special, unique role as leaders and as examples of holiness to the rest of the nation, so they're held on a higher level of responsibility, and certain laws apply to them that don't apply to other people. For example, the Parsha talks about the fact that they're not allowed to come into, a Kohen is not allowed to come into contact with a dead body. So I'm sure Elisa can explain to you that in the cemeteries and in the chapel services, whatever, there are arrangements that are made for Kohanim who want to attend funerals that are not direct loved ones, direct family members. There are ways that it can be done, standing in certain places in certain areas. But for immediate family members, the Kohanim are allowed to become tamei and have contact with a dead body. There are more laws regarding the Kohanim, who they can and cannot marry, what disqualifies them, certain disqualifications that disqualify them when they're allowed to and able to eat what's called truma. Truma is the tithes that the Kohanim can eat, but they can't eat it at all times. They have to be in a pure state. So that's a whole section in the beginning called of the Parsha. Then there's a little section that talks about animals and what qualifies them for being part of being offered as karbanos, being offered as sacrifices, and certain blemishes that would disqualify them. That's a small section. And then the bulk of the Parsha, the majority of the Parsha, is dealing with the festivals, the Yomim Tovim. So, for example, it starts off by talking about Shabbos, which is interesting because it says the following are the festivals, and then it starts off with Shabbos, which is not really one of the festivals, but Shabbos is sort of the source of all holiness and time. So it starts off by talking about Shabbos, and then it talks about Pesach. It talks about the Omer period, which we're in right now. It talks about Shavuot, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. Then there's like this little strange interruption where there's a few sentences that talk about the laws of gifts, where we're required to give gifts of gleanings, the gleanings in our field, whatever's left over in the field, to the poor and to the converts. We'll come back to what that little interruption is about. And then it continues with Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, and the other festivals and holidays. Okay. Then there is a little section about the menorah and what oil can be used and burned in the menorah. And then we get to where I want to pick up from. Very close to the end of the Parsha, it begins talking about something called the Showbreads. What are the Showbreads? The lechem apanim. Okay, so here we go. So there is, the Torah talks about, and towards the end of the Parsha, something called lechem hapanim. Lechem, as we know, means bread. Panim is, what's panim? Punim. It means a face. Lechem panim. It means the face breads. We'll see why in a minute why they're called the face breads. But here's the basic deal with those breads. So it says, you shall take choice flour, bake of it 12 loaves, 2/10 of a measure for each loaf. Fine. Place them on the pure table. There's a gold table. I'll show you in a minute exactly where that table stands in the temple. In 2 rows, 6 in a row. With each row, you shall place pure frankincense. That's a type of spice, which is to be a token offering for the bread, as an offering by fire to Hashem. He shall arrange them before Hashem regularly every Sabbath day. So there's a commandment for the Kohen or the Kohanim that are working in the temple that every Shabbos we'll see they would take the loaves and they would remove the old loaves and they would replace them with new loaves, and then they would eat the last week's loaves. Okay. They shall belong to Aaron and his sons, who shall eat them in the sacred precinct. So basically, let's take a look over here. If you look where I put the arrow, this is on the left is the Kodesh, the holy part of the Mishkan, and later the temple. To the right, where you see the Ark, is the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies. And as you walk in, facing the Holy of Holies, the Shulchan, the table, the showbread table, would be on your right, where that arrow is. Close up on that, as you can see over here, that this is what the Shulchan looked like. And the arrow over here is pointing to the bread. Those are the breads. Those 12, there's 6 stacked up on one side and 6 stacked up on the other side. And if you look carefully, they look like I don't know what shape that you would call that, but like they're like a U kind of, but then they come back towards each other. You see what I'm talking about over there? And they
Uh-huh.
face each other. The two sides face each other. So that's why, see right over here, they these breads, they face one another.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so that's why they're called lechem hapanim. I'm just going to reshare that because get rid of those marks. It's called lechem hapanim, the breads that face each other, and that's what these breads look like. So they would, the Kohanim, every week on Shabbos they would take off the old breads, these 12 loaves, and they would replace them with 12 new ones, and then they would eat those challahs, those loaves, those breads on Shabbos. There is an interesting custom that some people have. It's more of a Hasidic custom to place 12 challahs, maybe mini challahs, on your Shabbos table every week. And that, of course, is a symbol of this showbread table. So that your table on Shabbos should look like the showbread table in the temple. Okay? And amazingly, the Gemara, the Medrash, the sources tell us that a miracle would happen every week. And those breads, which were over a week old, right? Because you would make them on Friday before Shabbos. You would put them on the altar on the showbread table on Shabbos, and then you would take them off the next Shabbos. So they're already over a week old. The miracle was that they remained hot and fresh as if they were straight out of the oven. It's one of the miracles that took place. The Talmud in Tractate Chagiga says something very interesting. On the festivals, not on Shabbos, but the festivals, and the reason why this was done on the festivals is because on the festivals, theoretically, all the Jewish people would be in Jerusalem, because there's a mitzvah, an obligation to travel to Jerusalem on the festivals and to participate in the service in the temple. So on these festivals, the Kohanim lifted the shulchan, the table, this showbread table, to show the fresh loaves to the people. And they would say, see how dear you are before the Almighty. Miraculously, the loaves are removed a week later in the same state that they were placed upon it. Okay, so that is the miracle that took place every single week in the temple. Now it's interesting because there is a Mishnah, a teaching in Ethics of Our Fathers in chapter 5 that says 10 wonders were wrought for our ancestors in the temple. And it goes on and it starts listing them. I didn't put them all here, but no woman miscarried from the odor of the sacred flesh, meaning that it smelled horrible in there from all the meat and all the slaughtering, and no one ever had a miscarriage as a result of that. The sacred flesh never became putrid, it never rotted. No fly was ever seen in the slaughterhouse. No emissions occurred to the high priest on the day of Yom Kippur. The rains did not extinguish the fire in the woodpile, etc., etc. The wind didn't prevail over the column of smoke. So there were 10 miracles. But interestingly, this miracle of the showbreads is not listed among the 10 miracles. So why did the Kohanim make such a big deal pointing out this particular miracle? Hey guys, look at the showbreads. They're as fresh as they were a week ago. It's in your merit. It's because Hashem loves you so much. He didn't do that. The Kohanim, we don't see anywhere that the Kohanim, called attention to the other miracles. Hey, look, guys, no flies are here. Or hey, look, no, the Kohen didn't have a nocturnal emission, right? No, nothing is being pointed out other than this one miracle of the showbreads. So why was that particular miracle so special? What was so special about this particular? What was the message over here? So there was a great master. Great Hasidic master. He was known as the as Rav Tzadok HaKohen. Rav Tzadok HaKohen. You can see he lived from 1823 to 1900. He was a master of Hasidic thought, prolific author in all areas of Judaism, meaning not just the Hasidut, but in halacha, Kabbalah, ethics. He wrote on scholarly topics like astronomy and geometry and algebra. He was a tremendous genius and very influential person. Interesting background, you can read up on him, was that he was not born into a Hasidic family, but he was born into a family of Mitnagdim. Mitnagdim were those who opposed the Hasidic movement when it first came out. But eventually he had his own journey and he became one of the Hasidic leaders. So Rav Tzadok HaKohen, one of the great thinkers and writers of the last 100 years, says that there's a very important message that's being communicated through these loaves, through these 12 loaves of bread. What is the message? You can probably figure out, why were there 12? Why were there 12 of these loaves? Why specifically 12? Why not 5? Why not 10? 10 commandments, what was so special about 12? Why didn't you just have one? So he writes, as you can imagine, that would be kind of make sense, that each of the loaves corresponded to one of the 12 tribes. There were 12 tribes, 12 sons of Jacob, and 12 shvatim among the Jewish people, the 12 tribes. And these 12 loaves represented or corresponded to the 12 tribes. So each one of the loaves corresponded to another tribe. So when the Kohen would hold up these loaves and say, look how precious you are, he's saying, Am Yisrael, Jewish people, represented by these loaves that are fresh a week later, fresh and warm as if they've just come out of the oven. Look how precious, look how dear you are before Hashem. And Hashem loves every one of you. Now, the 12 tribes, each one of these tribes was a different segment of Am Yisrael. The Medrash says some very interesting things about these tribes. When the sea parted, when the Jewish people left Egypt, and the famous parting of the sea, we think of sometimes the sea just like, we think about the 10 Commandments and sea be the middle, and the sea just parts right in the middle. But the Medrash says that's not what happened. The sea actually parted in 12 separate pathways. Each one of the tribes left Egypt and entered into the other side in the desert through a separate, unique pathway. And the idea is that each one of the 12 tribes has their unique pathway in serving Hashem. That God is not looking for one uniformed version of avoda, only one way of serving Hashem. There's one Torah, there's one Hashem, but there are many, many ways, many unique ways to serve Hashem, not one uniform way. There's an interesting halacha, an interesting Jewish law, that when you're building a synagogue, you're supposed to try, if you can, if possible, to build the synagogue with 12 windows up on the upper part of the synagogue. And the reason for that is that symbolizing that no matter what tribe you belong to or what segment of the Jewish people you belong to, there's a window to Shemayim where your prayers, a pathway for your unique prayers to enter into heaven. So this is the message. This is a very, very important message for us, especially today, now in the land of Israel, because in the last 100 years, we know that Jews have returned back to Israel from over 100 countries. Over 100 countries. By the way, this is the prophets spoke about this long before this happened. The prophets, for example, Ezekiel says, I will take you from among the nations and gather you from all the countries, and I will bring you back to your own land. This is exactly what's happened in the last 100 years in Israel, that the Jews have been brought back from over 100 countries, just as the prophet explained. And in Israel today, there are all kinds of Jews. You have Hasidic Jews. Anyone know who that is? You have secular Jews. Anyone know who that is? That's Akiva Shtisel, by the way. Okay. You have Misnagdim, those who are religious but not Hasidic. You have German Jews. You have Yemenite Jews. You have Moroccan Jews. You have Ethiopian Jews. You have Indian Jews. You have every kind of Jew you could possibly imagine in the land of Israel. And they each have their own minhagim, their own customs, their own prayers, meaning that if you look at the prayer book of a Indian Jew or an Ethiopian Jew or a Yemenite Jew or an Ashkenazi Jew or a German Jew or a Sephardi Jew, a Moroccan Jew, they're going to be different. One Torah, one Hashem, many, many different ways of serving Hashem, many different types of head coverings. You have shtreimels, you have black hats, you have knitted yarmulkes, everything you can imagine. And the showbreads represented these 12 different tribes, and that Hashem loves diversity in the way that we approach him, in the way that we serve him. Okay, fine. That's the showbreads. Now, what's the very next thing that happens in the Torah? And this is what I want to focus on for the rest of the evening. Leviticus chapter 24:10. It's the end of the Parsha, right after the explanation of the showbreads and how the showbreads are performed, the service of the showbreads. It says as follows: the son of an Israelite woman went out, and he was the son of an Egyptian man. Okay, we have no name for this individual. All we know about this individual right now is that his mother was Jewish and his father was Egyptian. And he went out among the children of Israel, and they contended in the camp. He got into a fight. He got into an argument. And this person, the son of the Israelite woman and an Israelite man, meaning he fought with somebody he was the son of an Israelite woman, and he had a fight with somebody who was the son of an Israelite man, meaning he got into some kind of argument with a Jew. Okay, and what happened? We'll see soon that he ends up cursing or blaspheming Hashem, and he is known forevermore as the Mekalel or the blasphemer. Okay, now interesting turn of phrase. Whoever this individual was, he went out. What does it mean he went out? So Rashi picks up on that and he makes the following comment. Rabbi Barachia said, he went out, meaning, what did he go out from? From the above passage in the Torah, the showbreads. Meaning he left, he moved away from that. He opposed the concept of the showbreads. He was anti the showbreads. He said sneeringly, every Sabbath he shall place new breads. Surely it is the way of a king to eat fresh, warm bread every day. Is it perhaps his way to eat bread 9 days old? Meaning, this is a terrible, terrible thing, God. This is a terrible law in your Torah. I'm objecting to this law of the showbreads. Why would you feed the Kohanim, the leaders, the representatives of the Jewish people, old 9-day-old bread? Right? What's going on over there? And he went out and he blasphemes. He curses Hashem. He curses God. Okay, so the question is, what's the backstory over here? So let's take a look at these verses a little bit more carefully. Okay, here's the full version of it. So let's just read it again. I'll read it in English. There went out among the Israelites one whose mother was Israelite and whose father was an Egyptian. Okay, again, we don't know his name, but we just know that he had mixed lineage. His mother was Jewish. His father was Egyptian. And a fight broke out in the camp between that half Israelite and a certain Israelite, meaning a full-fledged Jewish person with a Jewish mother and a Jewish father. The son of the Israelite woman, meaning our individual over here, our protagonist, whose mother is Jewish, whose father is not, he pronounced the name of Hashem in blasphemy. He cursed Hashem and he used God's name to do so, which is a terrible offense. It's a capital crime, and he was brought to Moses. Now, a little background the Torah gives us. His mother's name was Shalomit, the daughter of Divri, and she was from the tribe of Dan, from Shevet Dan, the tribe of Dan. And what happened to this guy? He was placed in custody until the decision of Hashem should be made clear to them. Meaning Moshe didn't right away say, here's the rule, here's the halacha. He said, you know what? I've got to ask Hashem. In the meantime, we're going to put him into prison temporarily, and we'll talk to Hashem, and we'll find out what the ruling is in such a case. So I have 6 questions here. Question number 1, he went out. Where did he go out from? We've already addressed that with the previous comment from Rashi. He went out from the showbreads. He was going out, he was protesting the Showbreads. But why? Why do we need to know that his mother was Jewish and his father was Egyptian? That's apparently important in the story. Otherwise, the Torah wouldn't have told us that. And he goes out and he has a fight. There's a fight in the camp between him and some other Jewish person. What were they fighting about? The Torah doesn't tell us anything about what this argument was all about. So what was that argument? Next question is, if he's having a fight with somebody, one of the Jewish people in the camp, and he's angry apparently, why does he take it out on Hashem? Why does he decide to blaspheme Hashem? What does God have to do with this? You go and you have a fight with somebody and you're all worked up, and the way you react to that fight is to curse God, is to blaspheme God. What's going on over here? Why is he putting this on God? The next thing is, why do we need to know who his mother is and the fact that she comes from the tribe of Dan, Shevet Dan? And the last question is, why does Moshe not know what to do over here? What do you mean, let's wait and see? We'll put him in jail, we'll hold on, and until Hashem tells us what to do. Moshe, you know what the ruling is over here. Tell him what the ruling is. Okay, so those are questions that I have. And then it continues and it says, Hashem spoke to Moses saying, and he's about to give the ruling over here. So God speaks to Moses and he says, okay, here's the deal, Moshe, here's the ruling. In this case, take the blasphemer, this guy who just cursed God, take him outside of the camp. Let all who were within hearing, meaning everybody who heard him blaspheme God, lay their hands upon his head and let the whole community stone him. He's to be put to death for this crime. Okay? And to the Israelite people, speak thus and teach them the following law. Anyone who blasphemes his God shall bear his guilt. And if he pronounces the name of Hashem, he shall be put to death. The whole community shall stone him, stranger or citizen. If he has thus pronounced the name, he shall be put to death. Okay, that is the ruling that comes down from Hashem over here. That's Hashem's response. And then what happens next? A very strange digression to a bunch of random monetary laws. If someone kills a human being, he gets put to death. If he kills a beast, he makes restitution for it. If anyone maims his fellow, he has to pay monetary equivalent of fracture for fracture, an eye for an eye, etc. One who kills a beast shall make restitution. One who kills a human being shall be put to death. Okay, so this random set of monetary laws. And then finally, the end of the story. Moshe spoke thus to the Israelites, and they took the blasphemer outside of the camp, pelted him with stones. The Israelites did as Hashem had commanded them. End of the Parsha. So you have this beginning of the story, this strange interruption in the middle with a bunch of monetary laws, and then it comes back and finishes off the story by saying Moshe comes back to the Israelites. He says, okay, I spoke to God. God said, here's the deal. This guy has to be put to death. And they did so. Okay? So what is going on over here? What is this story trying to tell us? What's the message of this whole story? What's going on? So I want to start with my question. It was question number 3, to be exact. What is this fight all about? He goes, this man who is the son of an Israelite woman and an Egyptian man. His mother's Jewish, his father's an Egyptian. He goes out into the camp and he gets into a fight. Okay, so we don't know what the fight is about. It doesn't say. But there's a clue. And the clue is there's a lot of talk. If you go back and see, there's a lot of talk in this section about lineage. Our protagonist, our individual, our blasphemer was the son of an Israelite woman and an Egyptian man. And he fought somebody in the camp who was a full-blown Israelite. And his mother was the daughter of Divri. And his mother was the daughter of a man named Divri, and she came from the tribe of Dan. So there's a lot of focus over here on lineage. So it seems that lineage just might have something to do with what this fight was all about. And to get the answer, we're going to go back. We're going to go back in the Torah many, many, many weeks ago to the very beginning of Parshas Shmos, to the very beginning of the book of Exodus in chapter 2. And the question that I want to pose to you is, this man, this blasphemer, if you look at in the highlighted Hebrew over here, he's called the Ben Ish Mitzri. The Ben means he's the son of an Ish Mitzri, of an Egyptian man, Ish Mitzri. Is there anywhere in the Torah that we remember somebody being referred to as an Ish Mitzri, an Egyptian man?
Moshe.
Moses.
Okay, well, hold on. Before Moshe, you're right though, Lynn, but we'll come to Moshe in a minute. But there's another situation, and that situation is the story. You remember this story? Moshe, who's living in the palace. Moshe is living in the palace of the Pharaoh, of Paro, and living in luxury. He goes out. Moshe grew up, and he goes out and to check on his kinsfolk, on his brethren. And what does he see? Vayar Ish Mitzri. He sees an Ish Mitzri, an Egyptian man. And what is this Egyptian man doing? He's beating up a Hebrew. He's beating up one of the Hebrew slaves, one of Moshe's kinsmen. He turned this way and this way, seeing no one about. He struck down the Egyptian man, the Ish Mitzri. He killed this Ish Mitzri, buried him in the sand. Okay? When he went out the next day, he found two Hebrews fighting, and okay, fine. So Moshe sees this Ish Mitzri, this Egyptian man hitting a Jew, and could it be that this Ish Mitzri, this Egyptian man, could he be the father of our blasphemer? Remember, the blasphemer is called a Ben Ish Mitzri, the son of an Ish Mitzri, of an Egyptian man. This man that Moshe killed is called the Ish Mitzri. It's the only time in the Torah where we see so far somebody being called an Ish Mitzri, an Egyptian man. So in fact, the Medrash connects these two, and the Medrash fills in the following piece of the story from the oral Torah that we don't see in the writings of the written Torah. So the Medrash explains like this. So there was an Egyptian taskmaster. And one day this Egyptian taskmaster summoned all of his sub-Jewish taskmasters and sent them all out into the field to go do some work. And the reason why he did this is because there was a certain Jewish woman that he had set his eyes on. He set his eyes on a certain Jewish woman. Her name happened to be Shalomit, the daughter of Divri. And this Egyptian taskmaster went in to the tent of Shalomit. He seduced this Jewish woman, and he had his way with her. Okay? On the way out of the tent, her husband came back from the field, and he saw this Egyptian man, this Ish Mitzri, leaving the tent, and he discovered what had happened. And when the Ish Mitzri saw that he had been discovered, he began beating up the husband of Shalomit, the husband of the woman that he had just forced himself upon. Okay? At that moment, Moshe shows up. He sees this Egyptian man, this Ish Mitzri, beating up this Hebrew, the Hebrew being the husband of Shalomit. And Moshe takes the matters into his own hands, and he kills the Egyptian man, the Ish Mitzri. Okay? Interesting sidebar. Who was the husband? Who was this husband of Shalomit? The one that went out to the field and came back and caught this Egyptian man, this Ish Mitzri, coming out of his wife's tent. Who was this man? The husband of Shalomit. It happens to be that his name was, the Medrash tells us, Dasan, or Dotan, or Datan, if you want to say it. And he happened to have a brother whose name was Aviram. These are the famous Dasan and Aviram, the two rebels, if you will, that are constantly fighting and contending with Moshe all throughout the desert. Eventually, they joined Korach's rebellion. If you remember, Dasan and Aviram were part of the rebellion of Korach. And in the end, what was the punishment for Dasan and Aviram? The earth swallowed them up. Okay? And it says that the earth swallowed them and all of their children up. And this was actually an important moment because until the moment that Dasan and Aviram and all their children were swallowed up, it was yet unclear what, I forgot to point out one thing, Shalomit became pregnant, okay? And she had a child. And it was not clear whether that child was the son of the Egyptian taskmaster who had raped Shalomit, or whether he was the son of his mother's father, Dasan. It was unclear. But when Dasan died, and all of his children were also swallowed up in the earth, and this guy was not, it became clear that his father was not Dasan, but rather his father was, in fact, all along the Egyptian man. Okay, so that's who we're talking about over here. Now, fast forward back to our story of the blasphemer. Okay, and take a look at it again. It says, "V'yetze ben isha Yisraelit v'hu ben ish Mitzri." There went out a certain Israelite who had an Israelite mother, but whose father was an Egyptian. So who is our protagonist? Who is our blasphemer? The Mikalel, the one who forever famously will be known as the blasphemer, who blasphemed God and was put to death. This is the son of the Ish Mitzri, the Egyptian taskmaster, and Shalomit, the product of that rape that took place that night. Okay? So that's a very important piece of a connection over here that we need to understand. This Egyptian policeman raped his mother. He tried to kill his father. Moshe stepped in and killed this Egyptian, but he succeeded in impregnating her. And our blasphemer is the result of that particular crime. Okay, which now puts our blasphemer in a whole different light. So let's think about him and his life. So he had a pretty horrible life, right? He didn't have a wonderful situation. He was the product of this terrible crime. He's the only such person in the entire Torah that we are told did not have a Jewish father. Okay, so he's the only product of an intermarriage. It wasn't a marriage, but the product of a non-Jewish father and a Jewish woman. Everybody knows his story. Okay, it's out there. There's no secret. So he's an outlier, and he desperately wants to fit in, but no matter what, he doesn't fit in. He wants to be normal. He wants to fit in. So what does he do? He goes out into the camp, meaning he goes. He begins to try to find a tribe to belong to, and he says, "Well, my mother is from the tribe of Dan. That's why it was mentioned. That's why it was so important. That's why the Torah went out of its way to mention that Shalomit came from the tribe of Dan. I have no father, no Jewish father, but my mother was from the tribe of Dan. So I belong to the tribe of Dan." So he went to the Beit Din, to the court, to the rabbinical court, and what happened? The Beit Din said to him, "Look, I have bad news. When determining whether somebody's Jewish or not, we follow the mother. The mother determines lineage of Jewishness, but when determining what tribe someone belongs to, we follow the father. So in this case, you are Jewish 100% because your mother's Jewish, but you do not have a shevet. You do not belong to a tribe." Okay, so this is what his fight was all about. His fight was in court. He said, "My mother's from the tribe of Dan. I want to be considered part of the tribe of Dan. I want to have a tribal connection. And tribal connection comes with land rights. Okay, I want to have an ancestral land with the members of the tribe of Dan because my mother was from the tribe of Dan." And the court said, "I'm sorry, we cannot consider you part of the tribe of Dan because your father was not Jewish. He did not belong to that tribe. He was not Jewish. You are Jewish. You are 100% Jewish, but you have no tribal affiliation. And therefore, you also have no ancestral land. Okay. So he leaves the court very, very upset, very angry, dejected, devastated, if you will. So what does he do? He curses Hashem because his fight isn't really with another person. His fight is with Hashem. He's blaspheming Hashem. Why? Because he's really angry at Hashem for creating this law in the Torah that excluded him and that discriminates against him because he doesn't have a Jewish father. So this cursor, this blasphemer, the son of the Egyptian man, his argument is not with anyone else. His argument is directly against God. Why did you make this law that leaves me out? Okay, and therefore his response is to curse or to blaspheme God. At this point, we should really be feeling rather sympathetic to this person because he's really had a rough go at it. He's been excluded from being part of any tribal connection. He's been denied any ancestral land, and it's really we feel for him and we understand where he's coming from. It's not fair. What did he do? He did nothing wrong. An Egyptian man rapes his mom, and he's born out of this union, out of this crime, and now he's an outlier. He has no tribe to associate himself with. And what can he do? He gets angry and he curses God. So it comes to Moshe. He comes to Moshe. He's brought to Moshe. Moshe says, I'm not sure how to handle this guy. I don't know what to do over here. Let's ask God to clarify the law. God clarifies the law, and the law is he gets stoned, put to death. So wow, that seems like it's pretty intense. That's pretty intense. Like we sympathize for this guy. He had a really rough upbringing. He had a very, very difficult. He was discriminated against. He was underprivileged, and we feel bad for him. It feels unfair. So how do we understand this? So for this, I would like to quote a very wise person, my mother, who all throughout my childhood, anytime I would say that's not fair, she would simply say, life isn't fair. Right? Life isn't fair. In life, things can happen. Things can happen that as no result of anything that I did wrong, but I could be in a difficult situation. Yes, it's true. This person suffered miserably because of because of this terrible crime that took place for no wrongdoing of his own. Yes, something that somebody did before you created a situation for you to be born into a really difficult, underprivileged situation where you're discriminated against, and that is terrible and that is not fair. And you're right, but that does not give you a pass on the law. Okay, that does not give you a carte blanche to break laws, to strike back, to loot and burn, if you will, or to do whatever you want. Okay, that's a very critical, important lesson that's being communicated, and a relevant one in the Torah, that there are situations where people are born for no reason of their own into underprivileged situations, into discriminated situations. And as horrible as it is, and as unfair as it is, it does not give a person the right to violate the law or to act in a criminal way, in this case, to curse Hashem. People have situations where, due to no wrongdoing on their own, they can be born into a situation where they have less, and they're going to have to struggle more, and they're going to be left out, but that does not place them above the law. It does not give them a pass to being a law-abiding citizen. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. Okay, now let's keep going over here. So why is it that Moshe did not respond right away? I want to try to understand that. Why did Moshe not respond immediately? Obviously, he knew the law. Obviously, he knew the law requires him to be put to death. Think about it. In last week's Parsha, we read that if you curse your parents, you get put to death. In Parshas Mishpatim, we learned that if you curse a leader, the president, so to speak, the Nasi, the leader of the Jewish people, you get put to death. So certainly if you curse or blaspheme God, it's obvious Moshe knew what the law was, that this man had to be put to death. So why does Moshe not say right away, okay, here's the law. You blaspheme God, you get put to death. Why does he need to consult with Hashem? It seems that he wanted to recuse himself in some way from this situation. He didn't want to be the one to give the ruling over there. He wants it to come straight from Hashem. Why? Why is that? Because maybe Moshe was a little bit biased in this case. Okay, let's think about this. This goes back to what Lynn was alluding to earlier. We know that our blasphemer is known as the Ben Ish Mitzri, the son of the Ish Mitzri, the Egyptian man. So we know who that is. And we know who the Ish Mitzri, the Egyptian man, was. The Ish Mitzri, the Egyptian man, was the man who raped Shalomit and was the father of this person. But remember the rest of the story. Moshe kills this Egyptian man, okay? After Moshe kills the Egyptian man, what does he do? He runs away because the word gets out. Pharaoh hears that Moshe killed an Egyptian man, and he has to flee. He has to run out of Egypt. He goes to Midian. There's a place called Midian. When he gets to Midian, he sees the daughters of Yisro, of Jethro, who are being abused and accosted at the well by the shepherds. He saves these women from harm's way from the shepherds. And these women take him back, Moshe, back to Yisro's house. And what do we read over there? We read that when they returned to their father, Reuel, by the way, is another name for Jethro or Yisro, he said, how is it that you've come back so soon today? He was wondering why his daughters made it back so early from their work as shepherds. And what did they say? They say, V'tomarna, they said, Ish Mitzri hitzilanu miyad haroin. An Egyptian man rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock. An Egyptian man? Who are they talking about? They're talking about Moshe. Moshe's the one that saved him from the field, from the shepherds at the well. So why are they calling him an Ish Mitzri, an Egyptian man? He wasn't an Egyptian man, he was a Jewish man. So the commentaries point out, I put it down here on the bottom, one of the commentaries and others here, the Hemik Davar and others explain that we know that in Egypt, the Jewish people famously were very, very careful, despite the fact that they were involved in idolatry and everything, that they did not change their clothing and they did not change their language. They dressed like Hebrews and they spoke Hebrew. And therefore, Moshe, who grew up in the palace, who wore Egyptian clothing and spoke Egyptian, was easily confused in this case for an Ish Mitzri. The daughters of Jethro thought he was an Egyptian man. He stood out. He didn't look like a Hebrew. He didn't dress like a Hebrew. He didn't speak like a Hebrew. He dressed and spoke like an Egyptian man. He grew up in the palace. So Moshe's own identity is slightly confused. On one hand, he feels like he's part of the Jewish people. He goes out of his way to feel the sadness and the pain of his brethren. But on the other hand, he's looking like he presents himself, he holds himself and carries himself like an Egyptian man, so much so that the daughters of Yisro thought he was an Ish Mitzri. So he has his own identity issue. He has his own struggle with being maybe partially feeling like an Egyptian man. Maybe he identified with this blasphemer who is half Egyptian and half Israelite, so to speak. So Moshe has a similar kind of identification with this guy, and therefore it's a little bit too close to home for him. So he has to recuse himself from the case. Now, I just want to point out one more thing. If you remember in the beginning, when we were unpacking the Parsha, I said the bulk of the Parsha, the bulk of this week's Torah portion deals with the festivals, the holidays. And I said over there that it starts by talking about Shabbos, and then it talks about Pesach, counting the Omer, Shavuos, okay? And then there's this little interruption before it goes on to talk about Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres. What was the little interruption? The little interruption, a couple of verses over here that say, And when you reap the harvest of your land, okay, well, it's time for you to reap. You shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and the convert. I am Hashem your God. Okay, Pesach, Omer, Shavuos. Oh, little interruption, by the way, totally unrelated to anything, but just want to point out over here, when you're harvesting, make sure you leave the corners of your field and whatever gleanings are left over in the field for the poor people and the convert. Okay, let's go back. Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shemini Atzeres. So this just seems like totally out of place, completely out of place. When on Shabbos, when you're hearing the Parsha, you'll realize, whoa, what just happened over there? That was totally out of nowhere. What's going on? So maybe an answer to this is related to our discussion tonight, and maybe we can see that this is actually a perfect kind of prelude to our discussion. So imagine you're celebrating the Chag. It's Pesach, or it's Shavuot, or it's Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres, and you're celebrating the Chag. What are you doing? You're celebrating the festival. You're sitting on your ancestral land, and you're enjoying your bounty, your harvest that you just reaped from your land. And who are you sitting with? You're sitting with your family members and multiple generations, maybe your parents and your grandparents and your children and your grandchildren, 4 or 5 generations sitting together on the festival on our ancestral land, enjoying the bounty and the harvest that we just reaped. Hold on, stop, pause. Don't forget, in the middle of all this, don't forget there are people out there that don't have family members, that don't have multiple generations of family members to celebrate the festivals with. Who? Converts. They don't have multiple generations of people to celebrate the festival with. And guess what else they don't have? They don't have ancestral land because they don't belong to one of the specific tribes. So they don't have ancestral land. So don't forget about them as you're celebrating your festival. Don't forget about those people. You're celebrating your festival. It's Pesach, it's Sukkot, it's Shavuot, Shmini Atzeres, on your land, ancestral land, with your bounty and your harvest, generations. Don't forget the less fortunate convert who doesn't have ancestral land and doesn't have generations of family to celebrate the holidays with. Take care of him or her. Include them. Make sure they have what to eat. Make sure that you're giving them food and providing for them. Concern yourself with their well-being. And that's why this little passage gets stuck right there in the middle of the whole list of the festivals. And this is the perfect precursor, the perfect introduction to our story. And the flow makes perfect sense now. The story of the blasphemer probably never would have happened if the Jewish people had taken this lesson to heart, right? If they had said, what would they have said? If they had taken this lesson to heart, what would they have said? They would have said to this guy, look, it's true. You're Jewish, your mother's Jewish, and your father was an Egyptian. And it's true, because your father was an Egyptian, tribal affiliation follows the father, and therefore it is true that you do not have ancestral land. But you need to know something. You're one of us. You are our brother. We love you. We will not forsake you. We will always look out for you. We've got you. We've got you covered, man. You are part of us. So yes, it's true that you don't have the ancestral land, but don't worry. You're not going to go hungry. You're not going to be alone. Join us for Seder. Come to us for Pesach. Come to us, sit in our sukkah. You're part of us. You're part of our family. You're part of our people. Clearly, the Jewish people missed that lesson. Okay, we missed that subtle lesson that Hashem stuck into the middle of all the holidays and the festivals. If we had gotten that right, this whole story of the blasphemer probably never would have happened. Why? Because even though he was an Ben Ish Mitzri, even though his father was Egyptian and therefore he had no tribe and he had no land, but if he had felt loved, if he had felt cared for, if he had felt part of the Jewish people, and people would come up to him and say, don't worry, yeah, it's fine. You're with us, man. You'll come to us for every Yontif. You'll be part of us. He never would have been filled with so much anger and venom, and he probably would not have cursed Hashem. So this little throwaway line over here, right in the middle of his of the parshas of the Chagim, has a perfect flow into our parsha. Okay, Seymour, I see you have your hand raised. I'll come to you in a second, but I just want to make one last final point, and then we'll take some questions. And that is, you remember what we said earlier on? Let's see if we can find that slide. We started off the whole thing by saying the son of the Israelite woman went out. Okay, and Rashi said, what does it mean he went out? He went out from the passage above. What was the passage above? The showbreads, meaning his excuse, what he pinned his anger on was the showbreads. Oh, how can it be? You know, that's not fair. A king wouldn't eat stale bread. You're expecting the Kohen to eat bread that's 9 days old? But that's not really what was bothering him about the showbreads. First of all, everybody knew that the showbreads stayed fresh. We saw the Mishnah in Chagiga, the Gemara in Chagiga, that said that the Kohanim would, at the festivals, they would show everybody the miracles of the showbreads. They would hold up the table and show them the miracle that the showbreads stayed fresh and stayed warm. That wasn't his problem with the showbreads. What was this man's problem with the showbreads? Remember what we said from Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen? What do the showbreads represent? They represent the 12 tribes. Okay? Each challah represents one of the shvatim, one of the 12 tribes. What bothered this blasphemer was that he didn't belong to one of the tribes. The showbreads represented everything that he was, that made him feel discriminated against, everything that made him feel less, everything that made him feel underprivileged because of the fact that he did not belong to one of the 12 tribes. So the showbreads represented, for him, that was the symbol of everything that was bad about the Jewish people and the laws of the Jewish people. So what did he protest against? He protested against these very showbreads. And that's why it says that he went out. He went out from the showbreads. Okay, so that is the end of Parsha Unpacked, Parsha's Emor. I'm going to stop the screen share and we can take some questions if anybody wants to jump in. Seymour, you got your virtual hand up there.
Yeah, and my real hand as well.
Okay.
I have your explanation, or the explanation that you gave us for the Ben Mitzri kind of troubles me.
Okay.
If Moshe Rabbeinu was unsure of the decision, that's why he turned to Hashem. And the Torah is all Sinai. This passage, this whole incident, this regulation of providing for those who are out of luck by some technicality, wasn't that Hashem's time to say, oh, I almost forgot that. Yeah, you're right. We should give this guy Rachmanis.
So I brought up that question, and if you're not bothered by that, then you don't have a heart, right? It's exactly right, Seymour. You have to be bothered by that. Poor guy, Nebuch, his life.
He was pushed.
Hashem should have Rachmanis, right?
That's right.
Hashem should have Rachmanis. The poor guy, underprivileged, born into a terrible situation, discriminated against for no fault of his own. Why can't Hashem give him Rachmanis? And I said that I think there's a very, very important lesson. Okay, I think there's a very important lesson over there, which is that even when you are less fortunate, even when you are underprivileged for nothing that you did wrong, that does not give you a pass on the law. That does not give you a right to go and to violate the law and to commit crimes and to do things that are against the law as a result of that. I think that's a huge lesson. And I think it's one that's very relevant. I think that we learn from this in this story in the Torah that even when you are underprivileged and it's not fair, as they say in Hebrew, zelo fair, it's not fair. Even when it's not fair, and it's not as a result of anything that you've done, but still that does not give you a right to break the law. So Hashem had to give him the correct punishment for cursing God, because otherwise the message would have been, you know what? If you're underprivileged and you're discriminated against, and it's not your own fault, but it's because of the situation that you were born into, and you go ahead and break the law, we're going to have rachmanis on you, and we're not going to put through the law against you. No, that's not how the Torah looks at it. That does not give you a right to do things that are violent, that are against the law, and maybe Yavin. But I think that's relevant to our situation today in this country.
If I heard you correctly, you said when we talked about this little insert about the convert and the poor of you're our brother, that was all unknown fact. It wasn't the people that ignored him or neglected him. He was pushed into it by circumstances. And
Okay,
Moshe Rabbeinu appealed to the Supreme Court, and he still got shot down.
okay, so again, circumstances, but let's say, okay, Seymour, I agree with your question. I just want to try to spell this out a little bit. Let's say this guy, the blasphemer, he was angry, right? So let's say instead of blaspheming, let's say, because we don't, I think the problem is that we don't really relate to blasphemy as a crime, because we see it as more of like a religious infraction. But let's just change the scenario. Let's say instead of blaspheming in his anger, instead of cursing God, let's say he had killed somebody, or let's say he burnt down a store or did some other form of crime. So would you then want to say also, well, you know what? Look, his circumstances pushed him into this. Poor guy did nothing wrong. He was born into an underprivileged situation. He was born into a situation where he was discriminated against, and and nobody was nice to him. And the Jewish people missed the lesson, and they didn't invite him for Sukkot, and they didn't invite him for Pesach, and they didn't take care of him, and we pushed him into this, and that's what caused him to kill this person or to burn down his property. So we should give him rachmanis. Would you still say that? I don't think we would still say that. I think the only reason is because it's the crime that he committed over here was blasphemy, which we don't necessarily relate to as a crime. But the point, I think, is a very strong point. That yes, he did nothing wrong. Yes, he was underprivileged and discriminated against. Yes, the Jewish people did not come through for him and were not there for him and were not kind and loving and caring for him. And all these things are true, and his circumstances were terrible. But we don't use that as an excuse to let you off the hook when you're committing crimes. And the Torah I feel if the Torah had given him, if Hashem had given him rachmanis over here, would have sent the exact opposite message, which is that if you're in a bad situation because of no fault of your own, and you go ahead and commit crimes as a result of that, we're not gonna punish you for it. And I think that would have been the wrong message.
Rabbi,
Yes.
there may be a connection to, I think it's Parsha Pinchas with the daughters of Salafahad, and that there's a land issue, but they react differently. And there's also, I think it's Rabbi Akiva, I'm not sure, that connects them to the wood gatherer.
Correct.
So there's a sin that he is put to death, and then the daughters react differently in this land dispute and come out with a different result.
Very, very interesting and very, very connected. And if I remember, God willing, which I almost definitely won't, when we get to Parshas Pinchas, we could focus on the story of the daughters of Tzlafcha, because there are a lot of parallels over here, and you just mentioned several of them. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
It's also possible that Moses maybe hesitated because, well, the blasphemy was clear. The ruling essentially of the Beit Din was not necessary.